Welcome to the Take 5 podcast, where we would discuss films of small and large productions. Slight change of scenery today, for reasons I will explain later. We're going to be changing some stuff up. You're probably going to know that already if you're watching or listening. Anyway, let's just introduce the guest. My guest today is someone who has created one film and also has a podcast where he also discusses films. He's an aspiring filmmaker and director. Please welcome today's guest, me. I'm interviewing myself because I haven't got anyone today. Roll the intro. Written some interesting questions. I've also asked for some questions. I've asked some people to give me some questions, and they've helped a lot. Now, let's get into them. One big question that I feel is a great question that I've asked most people already is what got me into making films? And that's an interesting story, I feel. When I was younger, about 11, 12 years old, I was introduced into the world of filmmaking when I was on a production for a film, Molly Moon. That was the first ever film production I was in, and that was a very interesting experience. And I mean that was a very slow experience. We only did like a couple of hours on set actually filming, and then after that I did more and more productions, and the film that I feel got me into wanting to look more into films was, I think, The Imitation Game was the one that did it for me. And so I was on set with loads of other children at King's Cross Station. It was interesting seeing all the because where I was near Benedict Cumberbatch, who was on set with us, and so I saw the stabilizer rig. And the cameraman, and then the director of photography and the director, with children all across spread out across, and adults across the platform, and seeing that rig, and I was intrigued by the rig, and then I came home, and I didn't do it straight away because it was like close to midnight, and I was 12, 13 maybe, when we did that, and I was kind of playing around, and I looked up online, like I went onto IMDb, that's how I came across IMDb, and I looked at the behind the scenes stuff, and I got drawn into the world of filmmaking, and then that's when I started looking at films differently. I loved to try and figure out in my mind how, and try and recreate what they did in my mind, so I could try and figure out and break down the scene and as to how it was done. And that's it. That's how I got into filmmaking. Now, how do I decide on a story or a subject that I want to talk about, or create a film about? With lockdown, if you haven't seen it already, it's going to be one of the links in the description. I recommend, give it a watch. In fact, here I'll put a card up and you can watch it there. But with that, I wanted to capture that moment. I wanted to capture lockdown and what it meant and what it was like. And so, but then with other stuff in regards to other projects that I've got in the works, I look at what I've watched and I usually pick something from that, or I draw from personal experiences, and I write myself into the script. I don't write a character, because if I feel writing a character, you can end up writing someone who can be quite wooden. And so I write a person, and that person is the character. I don't see a character as someone that is played. I see a character, something or someone can be a character, but you don't have the character. You don't have a specific character. You don't have a specific character as such. You have the character that is played by a person who is played by a person, if that makes sense. I'm going in circles here. I hope you understand what I mean. I'm probably going to cut that out. Oh well. But I feel, yeah, it's going to be short and sweet. Oh well. How do I get around creative blocks? Well, how do I get around creative blocks? I either listen to music. I sit down. I'm sat on my computer screen. I put some music on, and I read through the script. Sometimes I'm listening to music that has lyrics. Sometimes I'm listening to film scores, and that's the first thing I do when I reach a creative block. And sometimes it works, and then I get an idea, and I'm like, ooh, I like this music. So I pause the music, I repeat it, restart the track, and then hit play, and then I carry on writing. And instead of writing something rubbish, I write something that I feel is meaningful, and that music helps me stick to my message. Because what I find is, as soon as I start going off on one, kind of going off track, I'm like, hang on a second, I've hit a block and I'm just writing complete jargon, which in a way is good, but it's not the best. What was my inspiration for lockdown? Let's talk about lockdown. That's a good one. What was my inspiration for lockdown? Well, as I said earlier, I wanted to capture lockdown. I wanted to capture that moment in history, but I didn't want to show that verbally. I wanted to show that visually, and only using the visual element, not using any audible elements. I mean, the music helped, and the music was great. It was a good track. I feel personally that it was a good track, and it helped with the story enough to show the message. But all the sound was there for was to boost the story. What was the hardest bit? Well, not necessarily the hardest bit for me, but the scariest bit was having my camera on, at a spot and then me cycling away, and I was worried that someone would take it, but obviously because it was early, there were very few people out, and so I didn't necessarily have to worry about that. But I still worried about it because this is a nice camera. For anyone who's curious, it's the Fujifilm Finepix HS10, which is a great SLR photography camera, which can also be used, which has some DSLR features. For example, I'm using it right now. Shoots in full HD for film. It's got a 30 times super wide zoom lens. It's not interchangeable, but now this has sort of become an ad for Fuji. Oh well. Great camera, highly recommend it for anyone that's interested in photography. Filming, I'm not so sure, but it's still a great camera. We've done that. What was my thought process when it came to the cinematography? Well, cinematography, what I wanted to do with the piece, with the film, was to have it, to keep it as grounded as possible, and by keeping it grounded, I chose to keep the camera close to the ground to push it across, so all the shots were low, except for I think one shot at the beginning. Other than that, they were all done close to the ground. You can see the ground in most of the shots, and by doing that, I wanted to keep it there and show how earthly everything is, how quiet, and how it sounds like how nature has, in a way, come back through lockdown. But then I didn't want to have it. I didn't want to have the piece so that it was a piece where you have audio telling the story, where you had a voice telling the story, because that wasn't my goal. My goal was to have it implied, so it's all the entire film's implied. And what's interesting with implications over literal is the fact that you're not giving the audience everything. The audience, the viewer has the information there, but they can find it. They can find the information, and they can take an inference from the story, or they can have the literal sense of story, which I showed through the person's journey. And the literal journey is the journey from wherever he's coming from to the park where he's going. However, with the implied journey, it's him. The character's going on a journey through lockdown, and is finding, or at least what I took from it, is that he's finding peace with the fact that the world's not going to be the same anymore. Because the world's, I mean, I don't think the world will be the same. Now, framing no. This is an interesting question. How do I work as a director? Well, I mean, I like to think that I work very collaboratively with the crew. And I like to draw from one of my favourite directors, Martin Scorsese, who said something along the lines in his online masterclass, which is a great resource. He said that if someone has an idea, he shoots it. No matter how good or how bad the idea could be, he shoots it. If it may not work, he'll shoot it, and then, however, if it does work, and he doesn't think the idea will work, then that can change the story, or it can change it for good or for worse. And that's how I think when it comes to working in groups, because I have done 2 projects. No, I've done more than I've done 3 or 4 group filming projects where I've worked with a group to film something, and I was on the I was there to sort of help direct the piece, and that's because that's the area I'd like to go down. And what was interesting with that was how people would listen to me, but I felt as though it was tough, because I felt as though I was effectively in full control of the piece, where I had full say. I was the one coming up with all the shot ideas, which I didn't like, because I tried working with the group and asking for their opinions. I mean, in two of the projects where one of my peers was cinematographer on 2 of the projects, he was great coming up with some other shots, and we worked great collaboratively. I mean, I'll play some throughout of the shots we worked on together from college, from coursework that we've done, and I'll just pop it in here and there. And then, so this is interesting actually. Which filmmaker, in fact, just want to quickly check. 11 minutes, okay. Which filmmaker, director, auteur, or any of those, have inspired me the most? And which of their films are my favourite? Well, Martin Scorsese is one of my favourite directors. I mean, he's inspired me, and the film that for me changed my view on film recently is Scorsese's Goodfellas, which is an outstanding film. It's currently on Netflix if you want to go watch it, or as of recording it's on Netflix. For anyone who's interested, next week we're going to be discussing Goodfellas and Martin Scorsese, with a guest who is also looking forward to this. So that's all been organised, and so that's something to be looking forward to the next week. But Goodfellas changed my view, because it's the way he shoots the film. It's the slow movements. It's the long one shot. It's the way the actors are played. It's the way you can see that it's not been done by one person who's controlling the full piece. You can see it's done by one person with other people that have come along and go, actually, let's try it this way and see what happens. And that's partly what changed my view on film. But then also, it's the writing. The writing was just outstanding, and that was what got me into a different frame of mind when it came to writing and creating and learning from watching film. What's my favourite genre of film to watch? Well, I have quite a few genres. My favourite genre is probably crime. So that would gang comes in, gang films come into that, and then kind of police TV shows come into that, because I enjoy a good crime thriller kind of thing. I also enjoy a good I enjoy good fantasy, so stuff like Lord of the Rings or Grim Tales, which is a fantasy and crime film, or TV series, should I say, which is an outstanding piece, outstanding piece of TV. I mean, I enjoy fantasy because that draws from very interesting places of the mind and imagination, and it's all fantasy. There's no truth in fantasy. It's all kind of make believe. You can do what you want in a fantasy, sort of. Whereas in like a crime kind of film, you have to be truthful. You can't make everything up. You can make up the characters, you can make up the story, but the story has to follow life rules, which I like. And I also like a good action. I do enjoy a good action. They're always fun. I don't mind a good war film. I mean, two great war films, in my opinion, are Dunkirk, which is outstanding, and then there's 1917, which I love. I love that film. I could not recommend it more. Go watch it if you haven't. And which one's my favourite? What's my favourite film? My favourite film is probably 1917 at the moment. I mean, that may change, but 1917 is an amazing piece of it's an amazing piece of cinema. The cinematography is outstanding. The special effects are incredible. I mean, some of the special effects you can't even see. What else about it? The fact that it is one shot, made to look like one continuous shot, is just outstanding. Now, on here, it just says future projects. I have quite a few future projects coming up. I have a few short films in the works. I have one I finished writing, which I'm working around on setting up the shot, getting the shots and everything. Is Bullets, which is a gang style film, where you have it's all about a deal between these two gangs. And then I have Lifeless, which is a personal project, or a personal film, should I say. It's a personal story. It's an extreme example of something that happened to me, but it's something that I would like to tell. And then I also have a third film, which is a survival film called Natural Instinct, the idea I got for that was, and how I got to that title and the idea for the story is that because everyone is on a device, everyone has a device, everyone kind of effectively needs a device to work nowadays, especially now more than ever, especially now more than ever. And I mean, so you're watching or listening to this on a device, and I was like, what if someone lost contact with all devices and he had to survive, and he has to survive and make his way back to civilization, but he can't find any, and so it's him learning from his primal instincts that I believe everyone still has in them, and it's him having to learn how people like the Neanderthals lived, and so he'll have to create his own tools and everything. And then I also have a film called The Conversation, which I might make into a series, Well, I'm planning on making it into a series. At the moment, I've only got one. I've got one film on that, one film written and finished, or finished writing, which is an interesting one. It's an interesting film about this agreement that two people had that never came through for unforeseen circumstances, and how someone didn't, what just wasn't accepting of the circumstances and lashed out. Yeah. Well, this is episode 5 of the Take 5 podcast. I hope you enjoyed yourself with this much shorter episode, but hopefully just as entertaining, just as interesting. Links, the usual, the Instagram, the Twitter, the other Instagram. Subscribe if you're not already. For everyone that's interested, who'd rather listen to this on Spotify or on a podcast app, I am in the process of setting up on Spotify. It's complicated and long because I have to do it through something else, and it's I'm for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be discussing films by some big names with a friend of mine who is a film enthusiast. That'll be interesting. That'll be something to keep an eye out for. We're doing Goodfellas next week, and then the week after we're going to be doing 1917. And then if you have any film recommendations that you'd like us to discuss, then by all means, in the comments, give the film a shout out. I'll be keeping a close eye on all the comments, and any film you say I may consider doing. However, the sorts of films we'll be doing will be films for cinema. So Scorsese films, or we might do Joker, films that are. So we won't. Yeah, I'm just going to stop there. If I were to set up a Patreon, or if I were to set up a Patreon, would any of you be doing it? Would be willing to subscribe to the Patreon? If so, I'll either put a poll up here, one of the two, whichever site it's on, or just let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening to the Take 5 podcast. Roll the credits.